Hey everyone. I believe we're alive this week and fingers crossed all should be working well. Our microphones I believe are working correctly, but do give us a shout if there's anything looks a little bit strange or isn't quite coming up. And remember as well, if you want to make sure you see all comments, you may want to change the chat from top comments to all comments, because otherwise I found that you end up not being able to see all the comments as they kind of come in. So that's really helpful, I think, as you're going through. I want to thank everyone who viewed it last week and who watched it in the week subsequently and threw some comments in, because we have got a winner, which if you're on here and watching, we picked a winner from all of the comments from the question we asked last week, and you are going to win a free class, masterclass, project workshop. It is up to you, anything at all that we would have on our teachable class section. And the winner is Gail Hartsock. So Gail, I think we have your email, but otherwise just pop in a message down there to make sure we do if you're watching again. And you get your choice. Just let us know what you want and we'll make sure to get it out to you. The other two winners of the spot prizes that we picked while the live was going the last time round were Kelly Quist and Shelley McRedmond. Now, each of you got a pattern. We haven't heard from either of you yet, so we are going to send on an email after this. But if there's a pattern you know you'd like and you're listening now, pop it into the comments so that we can make sure that we actually get it out to you. So as we're going through again today, we're going to pick two more pattern winners just randomly from comments as we're going through it. So that'll happen during the live. And towards the end, we're going to ask you a question. And all of the comments that go up either during the live or afterwards are going to get put into the actual winner for that. And it'll again be another masterclass. So you get to have a very big class where you can get in depth with any information you want, or any other workshop that you know, if it was just a project you want, that works pretty well. So please tell us how you're all getting on this week. Are you knitting on Yew Mor? Are you knitting on another project? Pop in here and let us know, because we want to know what you're working on. Or if you've got any questions, either specifically on Yew Mor, or perhaps you've got something that's more related to just another project and totally tangential, just throw it out there. That's what we're here with our Knit Together, is to actually just answer questions if we can, either myself or Magali. Or if we don't have the answer, throw it out to you, because some other knitter might have some suggestions for you. And Magali has been making some progress on her sweater. You want to show you where they're
at? So this is the colourwork. That's what it's looking right now. I'm now at row 21 of the pattern. So this is just the last row. This was so fun to make. It was really funny, and it felt very light, because I think the yarn's very light itself. And then because you're working color work, I'm just so careful with the tension, because I always feel like no matter how loose you think you're knitting, it's never as loose as you want it to be.
I know, and particularly when it's squished up, because the stitches, like the floats, actually look extraordinarily loose when it's squished up in a needle.
And like,
right?
I think you can see it there. Like it's worrying sometimes, because I don't know if this is visible, but you can see like a full the full float just going about. But it actually, that's something I do when I do color work, is that I just adjust like the stitches on the needles a lot more than usual. That means that I just try to pick it up here. Right now I'm about to change color, and I would, instead of having all of my stitches kind of squished at the end of my needles, I would be very sure that I'm kind of really evening it out on the needles before I start with the new thing. And I just had like that habit of always adjusting the needles, the stitches on the needles.
You have got the advantage of being able to knit continental and English style. Like that's for color work, the fact that you know how to tension with both is a huge advantage. Which did you start with first?
So I had it was a journey. No, I started knitting. My mom taught me how to knit, and she's French, so I started knitting. What is called the flick? Is it the? So I knit like
with the yarn in your right hand.
Like this. Yeah. This is how I knit. And then I had no idea that there were other ways of knitting.
Yeah.
Until I moved to Ireland and then I discovered people parallel knitting or knitting differently.
Often
like
people will
this.
call that English style, where they lift their whole
Yeah.
hand off.
Lift it, yeah. And then online I discovered the continental style, and I think when I all I could see about it was, oh, it's so fast, it's so quick. Continental is very, very quick when you're knitting.
Yeah.
So I decided to give it a go.
Yeah.
And it is very, very quick when you're knitting. And I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely keep doing this. But I think after I kind of got it, I realized it was important to me to knit like my mum did.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I didn't want to give that up.
Yeah, it was kind of a link to you with your mum. Did you notice much difference in speed?
So yes and no. I think because I've been knitting with my right hand for such a long time, I'm really fast.
Yeah.
But
also
I'd
that
say
flick method.
Yeah, because I'm not, and we've talked about this before, when I flick, I leave my fingers on the needle, and my hand never goes outside.
I'm the
However, the continental style is so handy for big needles. I found, because if I have a big needle, it has to go all the way around it. So I use continental styles for bigger needles.
I'm just looking through here and seeing people kind of popping in. I'm just kind of going to go back through a few here. Cindy's popping in from Minnesota, and this week she just finished a colourwork hat that she designed herself from a tin can knit template. Very good, Cindy. I'd love to see it. And I hear that Liz has got a chest infection. Oh, that's awful. Liz, I hope you make a fast recovery. Your mice are here in pride of place. You're here in both, in spirit and physically. A part of you has made its way down here. Cecily, Celine, you've just cast on in the same colors and you're working on a bit today. Excellent. Kelly wants the Yew Mor sweater. Perfect. We can get that out to you. No bother. Audrey, your color work is ending up a bit tighter than you want. It does stretch, just not as much as you like. Yeah, and that is one definitely where that's practice. That's definitely practice. I think making sure you've got a long enough needle so that you can actually, because we were talking about here, like this isn't for the knitting part, but she had been putting some on a barber cord. But if you're finding it's really squished in, try getting a longer cord so that you can open it up, and that does make it a bit easier, because the tighter it is, the more likely you are to pull tightly because the stitches are sitting tighter together. But yeah,
I find that making bigger gestures, bigger movements as you're knitting, just kind of emphasize your movements, is helping as well to make sure that you're basically using up loads of yarn in order for it to stretch at the end.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. I think we've got some other Jane Matthews was wondering, do we recommend to go up a whole needle size or half for the color work? That's going to be based on your gauge. I would actually suggest doing a gauge for the color work and seeing if it's getting too tight. And then if you're getting a much tighter gauge, jumping up a needle size. Like in the case of this, because of the way this, it probably also depends what you're talking about, because I think for the color work on this, I found that I was doing okay with the 5mm, but I had to really be very conscious of loosening it up. But the sizes, because the needle size is so big, you're only going to go up one needle size. So it'll be, if it was a 5mm, if you needed to go up, you're definitely not go up more than until 5.5mm. That would be, I think, more than enough to go up. But your gauge is going to tell you that. And actually with the color work of this, when I was designing it, I might have said this the last time, like I started off just doing the swatch where there was no increases, hoping I could get away with it. And I tried it on at the bottom, and the bottom was like, my shoulders were like this.
It was like a hug. Maybe it was a hugging.
Let's just say it wasn't a very attractive hug. But it basically meant I sat there for a day and went, no, I need to rip half of that out. And I put it away, trying to convince myself it'll block out, it'll totally block out. And it didn't block out. So then I swatched, and that's when, I've got it down there somewhere, but we've got a swatch where we've got, I went ahead and just swatched the bottom section, and then went and started doing increases. But the trick for me was trying to figure out how to do the increases so that they worked within the pattern, because it changes the pattern quite a bit.
Yes,
before we get on to that though, I do want to talk more about kind of color work and holding the yarn, because I think we've had a few questions that came in about the color work. Let me make sure here I haven't missed anything here. Wendy was saying that your mom knits the same way, and she learned the cast on first when she picked up knitting again as an adult. It made my hands move the way my mom did. Oh, that's really nice. I love that.
Yeah, and like I think there's like I think my grandmother must have taught my mom, and like I realized that that was something that was important as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um,
And the difference being that, like, often when people view holding yarn in the right hand, they assume you're lifting your whole hand off.
yeah, no,
And that is
yeah,
slower. That's
that is much
slower.
slower.
And it also, I mean, more so than the speed, I would worry about the fact that you're basically retensioning each time.
Yeah, and I think that would be more work and more strain on your.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I think what I find really nice is that I get to be very relaxed.
Yep.
And even especially if my needle is bigger, I'm gonna really put my wrists up there, and it's just going to be
Probably
so
not
fast.
up here, except when we're on
Yeah, yeah, obviously, sorry, yeah. But like, and then all I have to do is like that little flick,
Yeah.
and it's just so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm a slight variation again, because while
Yeah.
I knit with my hand, with my yarn in this hand, I sit it in the crook of my hand like this. And so then when I'm knitting and I knit this side, I shove it in so it slides along here.
Yeah.
So it's a slight variation, but it basically, it slides along. But
You're always being like, yeah, less movement is the better if you want to go fast.
And you're totally right to keep it as relaxed as possible.
Yeah.
And when I actually started sitting down with my hands like this, when I was starting, first of all, I tried to make sure my hands were rested, my elbows were rested, so that you weren't holding the tension in your shoulders.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Oh
yeah.
my god. Yeah, and it's what I like about the way I grew up was that the purl is very similar to the knit, as in all I have to do is just it's basically the same movement as for the knit. Whereas when I started Continental,
It's a very big
it's just like, oh my god, the purl, the kind of effort, the purl is more labor intensive than the knit.
Yeah. For me, I suppose, when I'm doing purl, I'll have the yarn towards me, and then it never moves because the yarn just kind of sits on the front of the needle, but the finger is out here rather than back there. The finger just sits in a different place.
And so when you do, like when you're ribbing, for instance, you just have this kind of nice kind of movement of
it's a much more natural movement. And like, I think knitting is very straightforward in Continental, purl not so much. It's a bit,
exactly,
more.
But I think your way of having the needle resting must be nice in terms of like the overall posture, for sure. Because like, for instance, I was saying I would have my wrist up, but then if you have you're kind of maintaining these kind of straight lines with your arms, and that must be like less stress on your muscles.
You know, the last time we were talking about different ways of starting. When you start off with the small bit at the start, I will tend to go for a circular needle rather than double pointed. Double pointed don't work for me, and neither do very short needles, because I rely on having a needle long enough to sit like this. So that's often your knitting style will often determine what works well for you. And it's also why when I'm writing patterns, I'll write several different options, because I don't know how someone's knitting. So if someone knits like me, a magic loop, but with nice long needles, works really well. Double pointed or the small circle, if you hold like this, it's fine. Or if you're holding this one because you're holding it like a pencil. So there's much less. Now I can see there's a question coming in here from Kelly. And you wanted to repeat how we hold the two yarns. Yeah, we're totally going to talk about how we hold our yarn colors and which is which. So with when we're talking about color work, you've got what I would refer to as the background color and a pattern color. It's not always going to be sometimes it's not as obvious. This one, it's really easy. Our background color is the main color, and for you that's the barrow, the darker color on this. And then the pattern color is going to be the one that you want to stand out. That's the pattern. So to make something stand out, you want those stitches slightly bigger. And so if you're holding, I like to hold, and I think you do the same way, when we're doing color work, we'll hold the yarn in one hand in each. If the yarn you hold in the right hand, I have to keep reminding myself of this because I kind of will forget. In your right hand is going to be your background color, because the stitches are slightly smaller. And the left hand is going to be the pattern color, because the stitches will be fractionally bigger. So you can hold it like this, and there's two advantages. One, it's easier to track through the pattern, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. You have that. I have that little count in my head. It's like 5. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And you kind of do that.
And they don't seem to get mixed up as much, because you can put, like what I will do when I sit down is I'll actually even sometimes take my chart and then write a cheat sheet, and I'll put the color that needs to be in this side over here, and I'll put this color here. So when I sit down, I won't forget which is which.
Yes, I do that too.
And it's easier to work. But we've had a question on Portuguese color work, and that's interestingly, when I was over in Barcelona, I was doing a color work class, and somebody was doing Portuguese knitting, and what they actually did is, like anyone who does Portuguese knitting, it's a pin to hold the yarn, so you don't tension with your fingers, you're tensioning with the pin. And what they ended up doing is putting a pin here and a pin here. So basically what we're doing with the hands, you're doing the very same, but instead of tensioning with your fingers, the yarn comes from the pin and tensions on each side. So it's actually pretty straightforward. It does. The only part when I started doing color work, because I started holding my right hand, and it was how I taught myself continental, it was the tensioning. I like learning the tensioning with my left hand. It's like, how do you tension actually?
Well, the thing is first of all, like, I'm right-handed, so there's definitely going to be more issues tensioning with my left hand. My continental is always looser than my other one.
Yeah.
I start with the pinky, and I always go with the pinky.
Yeah.
Because I know that some people are doing like a full circle, but I don't want to unspin the yarn or like tighten it. So I just here. Between the
I do even more complicated. Like this one, for this hand, I go in behind, and then it goes over my index finger.
Oh, cool.
Bizarrely, for my left hand, because I have a hard time tensioning, I do around my wrist, then my finger.
Oh, that's
because I just found that it was, even with this, I just have such a hard time controlling it that I just needed a small bit more. Like, it's not really around the wrist; it just comes over here. But that's definitely personal preference, because I just found that this kept getting loose, and I do need to re-tension this side more often, because I just don't have as much control. But that's because that's not the side I learned to knit with.
Yeah. I think because I hold my yarn like about at the knuckles, it's kind of, I find it slightly easier to have, like, if I was having my yarn here, there's no
tension.
Yeah, there's no tension. But like if you kind of go at the knuckles there.
And it's all like, when you learn in the right hand, like, I don't even think about it, but you basically do move the finger away to like let it flow through.
But you don't even think. You don't think about it. It's only much later you're like,
I love watching people tension, because there's actually loads of different ways of doing it. Actually, you might even throw it in the comments there if you have a particular tension style that works for you, or even if it was something that you consciously changed because you found that something was not flowing smoothly, or it was getting uncomfortable. It could be fun. I'm always curious, because it's something you don't think about when you learn to knit, but when you have to learn in a different hand, you're kind of learning from scratch again to a certain extent, and so you have to reinvent how you do it.
It's funny how as soon as I changed hand and I was trying to learn the continental, you feel so so unable.
And the other method, I've pulled this out here because it's, again, because I'm not a continental knitter, I don't use this. This would be kind of a knitting thimble or a knitting ring. So all it is got a hook on this side, and a hook on this side. And when you put it on, what it means is you can put one yarn in here and one yarn in that side. And you can do the same thing as with the other one. So you see the way this one is like what you hold in your right hand, and this one is going to be what you hold in your left hand. So again, they don't cross over, and it means that you can just hold this finger out and you pick whichever ones. But it takes a little bit of work.
I've never tried it. I'm dying to try it.
And because I'm not a continental knitter, it doesn't come very naturally to me. And I tried doing it in the right hand, but because there's more movement, it doesn't work as well. But because with this one, you're holding this finger quite rigid with continental style, it actually
because you're moving the needles more than you're moving your finger with continental. I think it would be really interesting. I think there are some with more than 2 holders, and I'd say it would be interesting if you have 3 colors or something. That would be really handy, I'd say.
It would be almost essential, actually, because otherwise you're dropping and putting up.
And again, like, tension would suffer.
Because the first color work I learned was in Tarsha. So anyone who's done in Tarsha, you're deliberately twisting everything. So in order to not have a hole, you will twist the yarn over and pull the next one up from underneath. So it means that by the time you finished a few rows, you've got this big tangled mess. Now you have little bobbin so that it makes it a bit easier, but it's still a tangled mess. And so when I started doing color work for the like stranded color work, I'm like, oh, this is much better.
This is a lot better. Like I think I started what we color work with Jacquard in French. I started Jacquard with Intarsia, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's awfully difficult when you get started. But I think that's why this one, I really like this to get started with color work, because there's no repeats. You know, you're not doing it all for the entire pattern, and it's just there's no minding the float, which I think is really, really nice.
Yeah,
except for
there's a friend of mine, a designer in Yorkshire and Kingston, and she does primarily color work and very, very fine color work. But I remember sitting down and watching her, and she was saying for her, she can actually work stranded color work as fast as she can knit stockinette stitch. And it was just, I was like, I like stranded color work and I do some, but it is definitely not as fast as stockinette stitch. And I also find, I don't know if anybody else on here finds this, is with cables, as you're going through, you know, you start learning where the cables are. And so often you kind of start reading the pattern. With color work, each row is different, so it actually requires a little bit more attention. I think
absolutely. There was no TV in the background when I was doing that. And I kind of have this kind of little pattern, because I think what's interesting on the chart is that the contrast color is darker than the main color, whereas for me the contrast color was like, so I really had a thing where I was kind of almost doing like binary code in my head. You go like 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 1 1, or like we all have our little things.
And it also, there's been times where I've had ones reversed where I've actually written in letters or actually color coded charts myself again if I kept making mistakes.
Yes. I think like being able to write down on your, like, that's why I have a tablet, and I really find it easy, like really handy, because then you can write down like all of your little things and then erase it and use it again.
But I mean, I will say that like having done, even though it meant that I had to knit learn how to knit continental style, I think that using your two hands is definitely my favorite way of working color work. Because I mean, you can do it with two in one hand, and I've seen it where people who don't want to learn the second hand, where you'll drop one color and one color, you know, pick the other one up, and it's doable. The only problem being is I don't think you have as much contrast between the foreground and background color, because they're both being done the same size stitches. So it's not, you're not going to have the added benefit of slightly smaller and slightly larger stitches.
Yeah, and like I think learning continental is definitely, I think it's like when I wanted to do it, I picked something that was knitted in the round, and you just do knit. And like something with stockinette stitch, you just go at it, you know, a pair of socks or something, and you just go at it. And by the end of your first project, you'll be fluent in continental, basically. I think.
Because I was actually, it's kind of the same thing here. I was just looking down. Kelly was saying it's interesting, they've all their own way of tensioning. She used to throw her yarn until she learned to knit socks, and then she was taught to knit left-handed, never look back. And for Audrey, she said that when she learned to knit continental, she just made a whole project doing a garter stitch baby blanket, and so that where the tension wasn't too important. And I've actually often heard that, I do think it's true, is that if you want to learn how to, you know, tension or hold the yarn in the other hand, pick a project and just commit to working the whole way through that project using the other hand.
And I wouldn't change the way, like I wouldn't change each project anyways, because the tension would be too difficult. So like even if like I was doing a gauge for a very chunky knit, and I was saying continental is so handy for very chunky knits, and I was like, even my gauge, I will do it in the method I've picked, and I will stick to that one. Because at one point I was like, oh, it's handy because if my hand gets like sore, I can use the other one. And don't do that.
I want to make sure we actually talk as well about increases, because in the chart on round 13 and round 17, there's increases worked in the color work chart. And these ones are make one left and make one right, where you pull the strand up from below, either from the back or the front, and you knit into the front or the back of it to twist the stitch. But of course, between each stitch, you've got two strands of color. So you can pick up either the main color or the contrast color. And somebody was asking last week, which you picked up. Now, what I ended up doing when I was going through, I was trying to remember what I did. And I think that I usually picked up the color that I was going to knit, but Mags was kind of, you paid close attention to what you were doing, and you varied as you went through. So I think it would be really helpful for people to hear your thought process on how you decided.
I really want to thank the person who brought it up last time, because I think getting into there with that question in mind definitely made it like, I was like, oh, I just have to make a decision. I basically tried both for the first, so the row 13 is when it starts. And I tried both, and I looked, and it just basically made a decision. One, two, three. I made a decision based on what it looked like and what I wanted to show off with the color work. So I actually ended up the first one. So when we start reading the pattern from the right to the left, the first increase, I realized I wanted to it was an increase right after that. I called it like the core of the pattern, the main color and that column.
These ones here.
So I realized that if I was increasing with the contrast color, I wouldn't have as neat of a line of a column. So I decided, right, for this one, I do want to, I'm going to use the main color. And the one after that.
And that actually corresponds kind of with what I was doing there. The fact that I was, for me, because it's coming into the main color, you use the, no, it's the opposite. The contrast.
Because the next one I did the opposite, which was, let me read my knit there. But yeah, the other one, I was like, oh, I'll just do the same. And it turns out I was kind of breaking my diagonal here. I wanted to, I call that a diagonal. That line here, I felt like if I was using the contrast color, it would have made like a little blub. And I didn't want that. So I went with the main color.
And remember, with these, like, none of these are right or wrong. These are kind of personal preferences you're going through. Like, either of them will work. So that, like, I made a blanket decision where I'm like, whatever color I was going to be knitting in is the strand that I picked up. But you did it, and then you look back to see what it looked like within the pattern, and then you adjusted if you're like, oh, this would look better if it was the other color. But it's not a huge, like, it's not
as huge. That thing's like, now I'm looking back, I was like, I could have gone the other way. I think it's just, you make one decision and you stick to it. And also, I think, because we were mentioning before, this yarn kind of has a really interesting behavior once it's blocked. So I think once this is blocked, it's definitely going to kind of make the motif like a little bit more defined. And for the other row of increases, it was within the same color. So I just picked the same color as the stitch I was knitting.
I'm having a look, sorry, totally changing the subject. I'm kind of looking back over here. Cecily was asking how much ease she should allow, because the chest measurements are in between the sizes. Her chest is 38 and she's not sure. She wants 42 because there's 4 extra inches. That would be kind of within the recommendation. I quite like with this sweater a good bit of ease. Like, for me, I ended up, like, you can see what I'm wearing on here. I've got about 3 inches of positive ease, but even an extra inch with knitting is really small amount. And I actually think kind of going up to the bigger sizes, I personally think it works well with a lot of ease. So I would be inclined to size up. If you're like, you really don't like ease, you like things more fitted, then by all means make the smaller size and just perhaps add even a couple of extra stitches at the underarm. I mean, even you're talking about just a few stitches with this, like literally 2 more stitches on the front and 2 more stitches on the back, and you've got 1 extra inch kind of thing, or 2 less and you've got 1 less. So it's very small amount. So it's not terribly critical. But I mean, it never ceases to amaze me how much variation and ease you can get away with and something still look well. Like, it's just, it just really astonishes me, particularly for a sweater. Like, for instance, I could wear it like this, and then I could have it where I don't have the polo neck underneath, and effectively I've got like an extra inch of ease, and it'll still fit fine, you know?
Yeah, and I think that kind of yarn allows for room for experimenting as well, because the needles are fairly big. It's fairly big needles. The yarn is very fine, so I think you have so much room.
I don't think it looks well tight across the bust. I actually don't think, I think it's better to have more room than less, would be my general feeling on that. Like some of our sweaters like Dahlia have a huge amount, like up to 25 centimeters, which in inches is about 10 inches of positive ease. So that would be, you know, you can actually sometimes get away with significant amounts of positive ease in sweaters. Yeah, we got a few more, and that's why there's the range between 2 and 4 inches, or 5 to 10 centimeters on it. You can't even go outside that. If you do like things more fitted, yes, you can go less. My tendency would be towards more, because I think that just colourwork yoke sweaters, if they're tight across the bust, I just don't think it looks great. And if you want it more fitted, I'd be more inclined to then possibly not put as many increases in for the A-line, so that it doesn't come out too much and just drop down the amount of increases. Another thing actually that I'm going to get you to slip half your, no, I might not talk about it. You've got the barber cord there.
Oh yes.
Because we're talking about the colour work, but as you're going through the yoke of the sweater, you're also going to have to make decisions on how deep you're going to want your yoke. So when we've lost our barber cords. No, it's here. It's here. We got it.
It was here all along.
So barber cords, if you've come across it, it's just a silicone tube. And what you can do with it is it's open on this end, so you can slip it on. We'll have a demo here. You stick it into one end of the needle, nice and firmly, because I have had them come off.
Yeah.
And then you can slip about half of your stitches onto it, and then pop it off so that you've got half the stitches on the needle and half on the barber cord. And what that will allow you to do is you can open up into a big circle. And when you try it on, you can really see what the colour work looks like. You can check your floats very easily. If you don't have barber cord, you can use a second needle, works great. You can use waste yarn, just anything and all that allows you to open up your stitches. And I would actually encourage you to try this on very regularly, because you might find as you're going through the colour work, if it's gotten too tight, if you go to halfway through and you're like, oh, this is way too tight, it'll suddenly become really obvious if you try it on over your head. So with top-down sweaters and with seamless sweaters, keep trying it on, because then you won't run into a situation where you've gone through 3/4 of the sweater and you realize that something looks a bit funny. So like we can pull these out here. Look how good, look at this. Like I'll even open it up across here. You can see how you can actually open the whole thing out when you've got it on like this. You can also very clearly see this is what the back of the yoke looks like, and it's going to be deeper because you've got the short rows, and this is the front of it, which I actually love. It's like color coding. When you're putting on a handmade sweater and if there's no other difference, you're like, I don't know which is the front.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is
and
going to be handy.
Which is the short one? This is the short section. So I'm going to guess. Do you want to?
Yes.
I'm going to get Mags to strip.
This is fine. I'm just going to put the microphone down. I do want to ask you, so I'm always using a red little stitch marker for the beginning of row, but were you using, because it was so handy to just use one marker for each repeat of the pattern? Yeah. Did you do that as well?
I did. I didn't, but normally I would. Because this was very linear, so I could see easily where they were. But I would very, very often do that. Yeah, just use a stitch marker for each of the pattern repeats. The biggest advantage being that if you go off stitch count wise, you can really quickly see it. That it's like, okay, I'm on the wrong end here, and you know exactly where you've got run into problems. So here, we'll try this on, and you can see which one is the front and the back here. All right, here we go. And you can see whether it sits, you can see how it sits down over your shoulder. And also, I'm going to pop this to the side here as well. You can very clearly see where it's going to, so you see this, eventually this is going to kind of come down and will fit the underarm. Like it's not going to come all the way around because you'll have stitches cast on here, but you do want to have it come down to like around here. So if you're knitting it and your row gauge is different, so it's very tight and it's up higher, you might go, oh, I need more rows. Or if it's different in the other direction and it's too long, you might end up leaving out some of the plain rows underneath.
Yeah, I think I expect that it's going to be a bit tight, and I might add to something because I have large shoulders and I kind of often
need a bit more depth.
But I really like how you kind of assume that we're going to
try it on.
No, not trying it on, but I just like the idea, I would never have thought of modifying a pattern based on my body type, before I started doing this, and you very casually say like, oh yeah, if this doesn't work out, you
Always.
just add this and that.
Yeah.
And I think it gives me a lot of confidence as
That's
well.
great.
Yeah, no, because I would never,
Yeah.
because I think when one does not necessarily have an understanding on how it's constructed,
You feel like this is what the
yeah,
pattern says.
so I must go. But whereas I kind of like being encouraged to be like, do you know what, you want
have
it
the
to,
answers.
yeah,
You do.
yeah,
You just have
yeah.
to be. You just have to have the question asked. If someone says, "Do you need to make a modification?" then you go, "Oh, I haven't thought
actually
about
do. I do now."
And you're like, actually, yes. And
Yeah.
like the tiniest amount, because it might, like for something like this, it might be just a matter of adding half an extra inch, or maybe 2 or 3 more stitches and an increase before the sleeves, or a couple in the underarm, and it can make all the difference between it being perfect and it not being enough. Like for instance, for me, after it was blocked, this fits perfectly, but I like tempted to add an extra inch to the sleeve because I like long sleeves. Some people prefer them like around this length, but my arms are fairly long, and when it blocked, I think the sleeves ended up just a tad shorter, so I think I might actually bring this down.
So did you feel like after blocking, like what happened to the yarn in your opinion?
I'm trying to remember if I was just in a rush to finish them sooner, or if it changed post blocking, and I don't actually have the answer.
Because that would be one thing though, that if I'm going to kind of make a few changes, I still want to keep in mind that
it may change
blocking might,
The only way to answer that is with the swatch. If you measure the swatch before and after, which of course now is a bit late in retrospect, but that's pretty much the only way you can answer that, because you know if there was changes.
Well, like I think because of the way the jumper is shaped, nothing is going to be a deal breaker in terms of like, you know, if you have half an inch, like a centimeter above, or like I think the design can definitely support that.
Yeah. I'm kind of having a look through the Cecily said the cords are great. They and the other one is, where is it? Janice, yoke looks great, and you like the suggestion of knitting the ribbing afterwards to change after. It makes a big difference, because you can see, and if you think you're going to need it more open, you can actually even have a few more stitches to start with, and then you can change your mind afterwards, because you could even pick up fewer around, or pick them up and decrease very quickly before you start your ribbing. So it opens up. See, and when all the way to the sweater is on here, you can see how this is the part where it can easily get stretched out. So when we finish, we're going to pick up stitches around here and then do a bind off. So it's got the cast on, picked up stitches, and a bind off. So it's got all three supports in the neck.
Yeah, so it's going to be like a firm kind of necklace, basically,
which makes
good.
A really big difference, because I've had questions before about seamless knits, and if I'm worried about them stretching out of shape, or I'm worried about them kind of moving around. And it's different for everyone, because there's loads of different ways. But when it's top down like this, the neck is where everything hangs for a circular. So that's what you need to support.
That's I never thought of that. That's such a good point, because you don't want to have, in French we say, if your collar is kind of losing its shape and kind of opening, we say it's yawning.
It's a good word.
You don't want to have your collar to yawn. Bailler. Yeah, and like you're like, oh, your collar is yawning, and like we don't want that. Sorry, that's a bit of French there, but no, that's really interesting, because you'd get the actual structure.
And in fact, because I do like the edge tight, I'll often do quite a tight bind off for here. And I know Laura had the same thing recently. There was a cardigan she finished, and she did the first one with the tubular bind off. Oh, actually, which there was a question somebody asked about tubular bind off.
Tubular bind off.
But with tubular bind off, you do it with one by one, and it makes it look really seamless, because you're sewing through each of the stitches, and it flows straight on, and it's really stretchy. But it's not very good for holding its shape. So I have done it before on the neck, where I went with the tubular bind off, and then it had that flared look on the edge, and then I took it out, did a standard one, but actually pulled the yarn pretty tight. And with the results that, like, just changing the bind off, pulling it tighter, even if necessary, using a smaller needle, can take it from something that goes, I'm never going to wear it, to it's perfect. Like, like the tweaks you need for modifying or making things go from I don't know if I'll ever wear it, to it's perfect, can be tiny, right?
I love that you're encouraging people to have like a lot of agency over their patterns. I think it's just such a nice way of, like, it's, teach a man how to fish, like, kind of thing. And I really like that.
It's important. It's important.
I'll pay attention when I'm doing and
keep asking yourself questions as you're going through it, because if if you're not saying, does this fit? Do I like it? Is something can be better? And then you kind of start, you've got the answers. You just may never have asked them before, right?
That's such a nice way of seeing it. I love that. Yeah.
It's just, we know what we're doing. Just, and Laura is informing us behind the cardigan that she has done. She's going to reveal it in January. So she's hiding behind there. You can't see it, but we can talk about the neck bind off with that, because that was what that was in relation to.
I think my very first cardigan, my bind off was so tight I could not close the top. That was the very first. But like I think it's, you live and you learn. It's just like
and different kind of bind offs. And like if you're doing top down and the bottom here, like for this one, you have to be super stretchy. So we can kind of talk about that kind of a bind off the next one, because if it's too tight, it'll feel like you're going to snap the edging when you put it on. So different ones for different places.
Like I think I had a phase. With tubular bind off, but I did it on some sleeves, and then while I do the dishes, it keeps falling off because there's not enough structure. So like I like to, my jumpers kind of sit there. So I've kind of recently used like another bind off. It's not the surprisingly stretchy bind off. It's one I found in a French book that I'd be happy to kind of show it off next time. Because it's an interesting middle ground.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. We can talk through it.
Kind of like. We'll try it. I tried it recently, but it was on a twisted ribbing, and I felt like that the aesthetics were not great. But I'm really looking forward to trying it on. Like I think I might try, just bits and pieces. Because we do want to get that structure. Like at the end of the day, sometimes I just do a regular one, but I'm just really careful.
Your attention.
And it's the same with colourwork. Like I go colourwork mode in terms of like very relaxed.
I do the exact same thing. Is that very often, like sometimes if you have a hard time keeping your tension loose, then you may need to go up a needle size. But if you kind of basically stretch out your stitches and a bind off, just like colourwork, is the same thing. So there was 2 questions that I did want to answer. The first one that came in that I only kind of refer to was looking at the tubular bind off, and someone was asking, with the tubular bind off you have a tail, and she wanted to know how you can go about doing it where you don't have this enormous tail. So what I'll often end up doing for that is I'll take one that I know I can reasonably work with. And if it's a felted one, I will generally just do a felted join and add more on, because like if you've got a really, really long tail, first of all, it's going to be a pain to pull through, but also tends to knot up on itself. So that's what I generally end up doing. Like if it's a small amount, I will just make sure that I've got enough for that. But for like, if it was the whole end of this, I would go ahead and make a couple of ones that went through. And we had another question, somebody asking about color work for narrow shoulders. So you wouldn't necessarily have to make changes, but if you felt like, I suppose if you had a smaller neck and you wanted the top part smaller and the bottom part bigger, my inclination would be start a smaller size on the top and then adjust the final increase so that you actually then bring it up to the stitch count you want. So that way it's kind of like a bit of a morphing of 2 of them together, smaller upper one so that you can knit the first part all the way through a smaller size. And then once you kind of get past, you can see that by the time you get to the end of the color work, it's past the shoulders. So you can then, with those other increase rounds, normally they're quite spaced out, but you can easily, particularly for the last one, go ahead and add in more increases, and it won't cause any problems with the structure or the way it's put out. Just space them evenly. You don't want like 5 increases here and none in the back. Just space them out evenly, and it should work fine. I'll make sure. Kathy, you're late to the party. Welcome, Kathy. Mary, that was your question there in relation to the narrow shoulders. Hopefully that helps you out. If it doesn't, or if you want more direction, give us a shout. But I would say kind of treat it as 2 parts: design for your, knit for your shoulders, and then for your bust, just changing the increase in between is probably the most straightforward way of doing it. It would be the way. That's how I'd kind of be inclined to approach it, I think. But I think that other than that, if you didn't really want the neck smaller, then you wouldn't necessarily need to change. You could just kind of go through the whole thing with the size you needed, because it kind of will tend to sit wherever you want it to sit. And before we finish up, because I realize we've been talking for a couple of for 3/4 of an hour, we could go on forever.
Absolutely can. Yeah.
I want to encourage you. First of all, we've got two Patron winners this time. Mary Ann McNulty and Cecily. Cecile Haley. Both of you are our Patron winners this time. So let us know either in the comments or by email what patrons you would like, because yes, you're the special this time. We've got another question that will have a free class, teachable workshop, project workshop, whatever you want. That's going to be coming for the next time. And the question you need to answer in the comments here, either now or afterwards, is what is my favorite way of doing color work? So just answer. If you were watching through, you'll know the answer to that. So just pop the answer up in the comments. And if you want to see what classes we have on Teachable, or also if you're working through Yew Mor and want to see a little bit more in color work, we've got anyone who has gotten the Yew Mor Patron, you've got free access to all of those videos that go with it. There's just a link on the Patron. So pop on over there. And if you haven't got the Yew Mor sweater yet, what are you waiting for? Come on in, join us.
It's so much fun. It's such a nice knit.
But yeah, see you again Wednesday, same time next week. We'll have our final wrap up. If there's any comments or any questions that you want to actually have answered, please pop them in the comments here. Another great place is go on over to our Knit Hub, is also a fantastic place of putting comments on, either in Yew Mor or just in our general newsreel, to make sure that we answer everything that you would like to have answered. I'll have my list of questions ready to go next week. If you're late to the party and you're watching this as a rerun, we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, you can still join by putting your comments on up there to join the competition, because we won't be picking it until next Wednesday. I think it's the 21st of December is next Wednesday. Could be wrong, but
sorry.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I think it's the 20th. It's the 20th. Friday is the 22nd. Dates are not my friend today. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much. Bye.